And joining us once again on the Time Warner Cable Metro Sports Line is Russ Lande, Director of College Scouting for National Football Post, as well as for the Montreal Alouettes of the Canadian Football League. And has a lot of great NFL draft information at his website, russlande.com. Russ, thanks for joining us. Well, your busy season is you're going to have a compact next couple of weeks ahead of you.
Oh, there's no question. It's the busiest time of year, and I just got to find a way to stay awake and make sure I'm productive and get everything I need done.
Well, it looks like there's some consensus building for the players that will be going at least in the top 10 places in the draft. Let's talk about the Chiefs. Let's talk about offensive line. That seems to be the focus, and it centers on three players. And it seems like we know everything about their lives right now. But Jokel, Fisher, and Jordan. Do you have an idea? The early consensus was that Jokel was the guy, but maybe that's opening up for the other two. Is there any truth to that? What have you observed, and what's your scouting report?
You know, I think it did start off as Jokel sort of being the slam dunk guy at the top there. I think as teams have really broken down the film, I think they see very similar sort of grading for both Jokel and Eric Fisher. And I think when you look at them, they're two uniquely different players. I mean, they're both very good athletes. But I think when you look at Jokel, he's more of a finesse player. He's going to try to be there in the way, stay between his man and the quarterback. But he's not going to attack his man. He's not going to get after him. And I think when you look at Fisher, he's not as technically sound as a guy like Jokel, but he's a little bit more aggressive, a little bit nastier. And I think most teams, if they have to choose between the two, are always going to go with the nastier guy. The guy's got a little bit more intensity, aggressiveness, competitiveness, because those guys usually succeed a little bit better. In terms of Jordan, I think the Chiefs would love to get their hands on Deion Jordan. I just don't think they want to use the first pick on him. I think they would love to get a dynamic pass rusher. And although they have Justin Houston and Tamba Hali already, I think they view Deion as one of those rare guys who could line up in a variety of spots. And you wouldn't have to replace them. You could move him all around, have him stand up, have put a hand on the ground at the defensive end, do all sorts of different things to take advantage of his rare initial quickness and natural pass rush skills. So I think it's probably going to be Fisher, but I think their desire to get Jordan is going to lead them to possibly taking a little bit less to trade out of that first pick because they really like what Jordan could bring to the defense.
I say, when you talk about Fisher being nasty and Jokel being more technically sound, which one fits better with Andy Reid and his style of offense?
You know, I think he would like a guy like Fisher a little bit more. I think he likes that guy who's going to go out there, he's going to get his man, and he's not just going to get in the way, but he's going to try to physically dominate him. He's going to try to knock him off his feet, and he's going to stay after the block and to the whistle. I think that's sort of also the mentality that Andy wants to bring to the Chiefs now. He wants to make them a little bit more of an aggressive football team, and that's where I think Fisher separates himself from Jokel.
All right, we all know that teams will be floating trial balloons for the next couple of weeks and what they're going to do with their draft positions. The early balloons that have been floated out there is the Jaguars want to trade out of the number 2 spot, and that the Raiders are so hammered by the cap that they might want to move down as well. What do you think of those spots, and do those have an effect on the Chiefs and their value with the number 1 overall pick and their maneuverability if they want to trade out of it?
Well, firstly, if it's legitimate that both 2 and 3 are trying to trade out, then yeah, no question, makes the Chiefs in a much more difficult position because then it becomes a team can wait for the Chiefs to pick and then select most likely the guy they were looking for. But I will tell you, although there are a lot of rumors about Jacksonville trying to get out of that pick, I've heard from people I really do trust that they are willing to listen, but they would much prefer to stay there and select a quarterback because I believe they have made the decision that Gabbard is not going to be the guy long term and that they're going to try to identify a guy and probably have already that can be their quarterback of the future.
One of the names that's also being floated in terms of interest for the Chiefs, not at number 1 overall, but a player the Chiefs would like to get their hands on is Kiko Alonso, the inside linebacker from Oregon. The Chiefs defense is going to change the way they play football, be much more aggressive. We've seen the last 4 years they were not an aggressive defense. They were a read and react defense. And where would a guy like Kiko Alonso fit in, and where do you gauge how he might fit with the Chiefs?
You know, I mean, when you look at Alonso, I mean, I think he's probably someone that the Chiefs can look at probably in the 3rd round, maybe the 2nd, but I really think the 3rd is probably a better fit. I mean, when you look at him, he's an athletic kid. He's very explosive to the ball, and I think that's what makes him enticing for a team that's going to play an aggressive style of defense is when he identifies the play, he runs to it and explodes to the ball. So if you want a guy who can shoot gaps, get behind the line of scrimmage, who can track plays down across the field, I mean, This guy has those tools. I really look at him as a guy that, for a lot of teams, could line up in almost any position because he's so athletic and fast. I think the issue teams have with him is he's a very quick, explosive guy going forward. He's not as effective when he has to pedal and move in coverage. Because of that, a lot of teams want to use him as a chase guy and as a pass rusher, not so much as a coverage guy in terms of zone coverage.
In terms of that style of defense that the Chiefs will be moving to the current Chiefs roster have the personnel to run that style of defense, or will they be looking to this draft to supplement what they have and find some guys who can play in this system?
Well, I think they have a few guys. I mean, when you look at Tom Bahali and Justin Houston, I mean, they're both sort of that aggressive attack edge pass rusher. I think what they need to find is the defensive lineman who can fit that role. They had Drake Nevis as a guy that is sort of to me, a guy that would fit what Andy Reid has done for many years in Philadelphia. He's a guy, obviously they don't have, but he's a guy that could fit that mold, sort of an undersized, aggressive, attacking interior guy. And then they need to find guys that can play along the line, that can get into the backfield, whether it's as a nose, defensive ends, whatever they have to do, they've got to find guys who can penetrate. Because to make plays and be aggressive, you've got to be able to penetrate. You can't be two-gap defensive linemen.
I want to switch to the tight end position. Those of us here in Kansas City got to see a lot of Tony Gonzalez, and he set the standard for the next wave of tight ends in the National Football League. And since Tony was traded to the Atlanta Falcons, the Chiefs have not replaced him, honestly. They have not found someone even close to that caliber. And as we understand Andy Reid's new system, it kind of rests on the shoulders of the tight end. The quarterback and the tight end have to be in sync, and that's kind of the first option. Do the Chiefs look to the draft to find that next Tony Gonzalez, who may not be there? Do they try to get a free agency guy and kind of talk about Andy Reid and how he works with his tight ends and what he expects from his tight ends?
Well, they do use the tight end a lot. I think what's interesting, if you look at his history in Philadelphia, they use the tight end a ton, but they really didn't draft tight ends high. They generally use third and fourth round picks to identify guys that they thought fit their scheme, guys like Brent Seelick. I think when you look at what's available in this draft, I mean, if they want to use a higher pick like a second rounder, there are guys like Gavin Escobar and Zach Ertz from out west that are really athletic, tall tight ends who can make big plays as receivers. I think the players they'd probably be looking more towards, because I don't think they're going to use that pick at the top of the second round on a tight end. I think in that third or fourth round, I think guys like Vance McDonald, the big, athletic, receiving tight end out of Rice, who's also a pretty good blocker, or a kid named Matt Furstenberg out of Maryland. Not a huge kid, but similar to Seelick in that he's sort of a thinner guy. He's not a great blocker, but he is a very competitive one. He runs excellent routes. He has great hands. He's a guy I could see in the third round or even the top of the fourth that the Chiefs would take a chance on. And I think he would make an immediate impact catching passes in Andy Reid's offense.
We'll kind of bring it back full circle where we started back at the offensive line. The Chiefs will definitely have a new right tackle this year with Eric Winston no longer with the organization. And it could be Brandon Albert moving to right tackle, or it could be another player the Chiefs either draft or acquire through free agency. When you look at the tackle position as well as the rest of the offensive line, what are the biggest need spots, and do they have the guys on the roster currently on that line to fit with Andy Reid and what he wants to run?
I think they definitely, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the situation with Brandon Albert's back. If his back is healthy, I personally think they're making a mistake, A, by switching him to right tackle, and B, by trying to trade him and then replace him with a rookie. Why wouldn't you keep him, let him be the stellar left tackle that he is, and then address the right tackle position in the draft? Now, if the back issue is a long-term concern and they don't think they're going to invest the money, they really have to make the move to try to acquire left tackle. But their line needs some work. I mean, Rodney Hudson has not proven himself at this point. John Asamoah, I think, is a young guy with a lot of potential, but he's not there yet. So, I think they have some tools, but they're far from an above-average line. I think right now they're a below-average offensive line that needs to get better.
All right, final question for you. The wide receiver position, Dwayne Bowe has signed his contract. Jonathan Baldwin has, quite frankly, not done anything in a Chiefs uniform, and certainly Andy Reid, he likes to use a lot of multiple wide receiver sets. Who are maybe some of the top 2, 3, 4 guys that the Chiefs would look at later in the draft to come in and play Andy Reid's system?
Well, I think a few guys. I think Robert Woods from USC would be a guy in that second or third round I think the Chiefs would strongly consider him. He's on such great route. he would be the polished guy who could handle a lot of the stuff on the other side of Bo. I think in the latter rounds, there are guys they're going to look at that maybe aren't sort of, I don't know, household names is probably the word. But they're going to take some gambles on some guys. I think one late round guy to keep sort of an eye on, or whatever the word may be, is a kid named Darryl Stonema. He's probably going to be a 5th to 7th rounder. Played at Michigan to start his career. Got some issues there. Ended up at Baylor. He's a very talented kid with the talent to be a high-end starter in the NFL. I think he's a late-round guy that would fit their system. He's big. He's athletic. He can run. He would fit, when you look at what Andy did in Philadelphia, that Jeremy Maclin type role.
Right.
He's not as explosive as Maclin, but he's got a lot of the skills that Maclin does, and he's going to be available late because of some of the off-field issues he ran into at Michigan.
We encourage our viewers to go to the website russlande.com, and Lande is spelled Lande, to get all the great draft information. And someday down the road, not now, but I'm going to have to ask you about working with the Montreal Alouettes and how you prepare for the draft when you have to contend with what the NFL takes and what is left over. That's a conversation for another day. Russ, thank you very much.
You got it. Thanks so much for having me on.
This has been a production of Metro Sports and Time Warner Cable, Kansas City.